Okay, I guess we're ready to get started. So welcome to the August board meeting of the Buffalo Fiscal Stability Authority. Thank you for being here. This meeting is being recorded and will be transcribed as required. Therefore, I ask that you please state your name before commenting. At this time, I'll ask Nikita to indicate who is on this call.
Hello.
Lynette Federer.
Thank you.
Robert Solomon.
Okay. All right. I have all of BFSA staff, Chair Olson, Director Floss, Interim Vice Chair Jurasek, Robert Solomon, Benjamin Swanekamp. I have a restricted number of Robert Drilling, City of Buffalo, Lisa Bryce, Rich Grimm, which is BFSA's legal counsel, and a E. Lubin.
Gillian Brown is on as well.
Mr. Brown from BMHA.
And Donna Ostridge.
Okay. Hi, Gillian.
Hi, Dean Olson. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Okay. In order to assist with background noise, I would ask that you mute your lines when not speaking, although we'll do this locally rather than centrally so that we don't cut anybody off. Our agenda today includes a review of the proposed Capital Fund Housing Authority revenue bond to be issued by the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority. Also, the Governance Committee met earlier today and has recommended that the full board approve various BFSA policies, procedures, and annual reports. Staff will also provide a brief organizational overview. I would like to bring your attention to two items that require your completion. The first is the annual certification regarding your compliance with the Code of Ethics. The second item is a board self-evaluation. This evaluation process is required to be conducted annually and filed with New York State. Although, as Director Arthur frequently points out, it's literally filed into some cabinet somewhere. You will be receiving by mail a copy of each of these for your completion, along with two separate envelopes to mail the items back. The evaluation process is confidential, and responses will be compiled at the next Governance Committee meeting to be held on September 23rd. We will begin today's meeting with Director Floss taking a roll call of the directors.
Whoops. Okay. Let me find my list again. Chair Olson.
Present.
Okay. Vice Chair Jurasek.
Present.
Okay. Secretary Arthur is excused. Director Floss is here. Mayor Brown by proxy.
Present.
Donna, are you?
I'm here.
Erie County Executive Polling Cars by proxy.
Here.
Here. All right. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Fred. Since there is a quorum present, our first order of business is to approve the minutes from the meetings held on June 16th and June 24th. Directors will find a draft of those minutes along with the accompanying draft resolution in your board book under tab 2.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Here's the second, Jeanette.
Thank you, Jeanette. Any additions, deletions, or changes to be made? Okay, hearing none. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Okay. So let's see. Now we're going to move on to the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority proposed capital fund housing revenue bond. Included in your board book under tab 3 is a copy of the original submission from the BMHA's executive director outlining the general terms of the transaction and requesting BFSA review. Also included is a letter providing additional information dated July 14th, 2020, and a draft copy of the preliminary placement memo. Attending today to discuss this transaction with us is BMHA's Executive Director, Gillian Brown, BMHA's Deputy Executive Director, Modesto Candelario, and a representative...
Mr. Candelario won't be here today.
Won't be? Okay. I didn't see him.
Sorry about that.
And a representative from the placing agent, Mr. Solomon. Before we discuss this transaction with the executive team from BMHA, our staff will provide us with a brief summary of the transaction. Nathan, could you please begin with your comments?
Thank you, and good afternoon. The following is a brief overview of BMHA's Capital Fund Financing Program's bond transaction. Prior to each slide, I'll notate the slides so that people can follow along with their own individual copy. Slide number 2. On June 20th, 2019, the BMHA Board of Commissioners adopted a resolution to, quote, undertake a transaction of the bonds in an amount not to exceed $15 million. The bonds will be secured on a first priority basis with a pledge from the HUD Capital Fund to the trustee for the bondholders. Slide number 3. The Capital Fund Financing Program is a program that allows public authorities to borrow the net present value of up to 33% of future 20-year HUD Capital Fund allocations. The funds allow PHAs to perform additional capital improvement work, and it's the first step toward a comprehensive revitalization strategy for all of the developments. A couple examples of local public authorities that have utilized this program include Lackawanna, Syracuse, and the Elmira Public Housing Authorities. Slide number 4. BMHA contracted with the Dominion Due Diligence Group to perform a fiscal needs assessment of all BMHA federal properties. The PNA, Fiscal Needs Assessment, was completed back in March and identified BMHA's long-term capital needs in excess of $440 million. BMHA subsequently submitted the findings to HUD and is currently awaiting HUD's final program approval. The property needs assessment will be used as a guide to determine priorities as well as what asset repositioning strategy will be utilized. Ultimately, HUD's Physical Needs Assessment Subsystem, or PASS, scores will be a determining factor as to which work is done immediately and which will be addressed in the long term. Slide number 5. This slide details BMHA's BFFP program. The program currently includes 5 developments, including the LBJ, Frank A. Sedita, Masters Gary Apartments, Uvard Apartments, as well as the Frederick Douglass Towers at 515 Clinton Street. The program's total construction costs are estimated at $13.9 million. The soft costs are, including the cost of issuance and the debt service reserve fund, are estimated at $1.1 million for a total program currently proposed at $15 million. Slide number 6. I'll briefly provide the bond transactions overview. BMHA is planning to issue tax-exempt capital fund housing revenue bonds, Series 2020, in an aggregate principal amount of up to $15 million. Slide 7. The Series 2020 bonds will be a fixed-rate bonds with 20-year terms, semi-annual interest payments, and annual principal payments. The Series 2020 bonds will be revenue bonds. It will not entail a general credit of BMHA or the City of Buffalo. There will be no change in legal title to the project, and no mortgage will be granted as security for the 2020 bonds. This transaction is expected to close in the third quarter of this current fiscal year, sometime between January 1st and March 31st of 2021. The repayment is secured by HUD's annual capital fund allocation, which is currently estimated at $11.6 million annually. It's a private sale, or with private placement sale. The placing agent is Beacon Securities, Inc., and the anticipated rating is AA- from Standard & Poor's. That concludes my brief overview of the history and the bond transaction summary.
Chair Olson, you may be on mute.
Is that better?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. I sound better on mute, actually. Okay. Are there any questions for Nathan?
Yeah, Director Claus.
Yeah, Fred.
A couple of questions. The first is we're talking about a net present value, which means that an interest rate had to be used to make that calculation to get to the 33%. What rate was used, and if the rate changes over time, will that change any of the calculations, projects, et cetera, that will be allowed to be done? How did that process work?
This is Robert Solomon. May I speak, please?
Yes, please.
Yes. We computed this at an interest rate of 2.57%. This basically means for the Housing Authority to borrow $15 million, they're using approximately 8% of their annual capital funds. HUD permits an authority to borrow use 33% of their annual capital funds. If the rate declines, which I'm sure it has since we ran these numbers, it'll be the same amount of borrowing, but it'll be a smaller percentage of the Housing Authority's capital funds, which means they'll have more money available for other projects.
Okay. Yeah. Can I ask about the cost of issuance? I mean, $750,000 seems to be, from my perspective, a little bit high. But again, this is a HUD project, so I'm not quite sure how the issuance was done and how was it bid out. Was this lowest bid or for Beekman, or didn't this have to be bid out?
Well, number one, it's just when we computed these numbers for the HUD submission, we just used a number of 5%, which is probably greater than what we've experienced in the past. If the total bills come out and it's less than 5%, the money goes back to the Housing Authority. It's basically a plug figure. We don't want to come in with a bigger number than we've projected, so it should be substantially below 750.
Okay.
So anything below that inures to the Housing Authority. It's their money, not ours. And
okay.
Frankly, we've been working on this thing for more than a year. I haven't seen any bills from any of the lawyers or any of the professionals. So it's very much unknown right now.
Okay.
Director Floss, I think, if you wouldn't mind, I might pause any specific questions at this point, as we had asked the executive team from the BMHA to kind of go through the details of this particular transaction with the board. So maybe if we turn it to them for their comments, and then I just don't want to supersede their comments too far and focus on items that maybe they're going to talk to us about.
Okay, that's fine by me. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
So at this point, thank you, Chair. Thank you.
We'll now turn it over to the BMHA.
Well, this is Gillian Brown. I appreciate your giving us the opportunity to present this. I will say that I don't think, speaking for Mr. Solomon and Ms. Federer, I don't think they mind simply responding to specific questions if that's the format you want to go through. Otherwise, I would just ask Mr. Solomon, who I've spoken with extensively about this in the previous weeks, if he wants to just summarize the transaction from our point of view.
Whichever is best for the board. I'm happy to sit here and answer individual questions. No problem at all.
Why don't you summarize and we'll ask questions?
I'm sorry?
Then why don't you go ahead and give your summary, and then if there are any questions, we'll ask them then.
Okay, basically, we've been working this transaction for more than a year. The physical needs analysis probably took 9 months. HUD is also requiring something called a review of the declarations of trust, which are the mortgages on all 26 federal properties. The Housing Authority had to conduct a title search. Most of these properties, not most, a large number of them are pre-war. Some of the mortgages have been retired. Some of the liens aren't valid anymore. We're confident now, subject to HUD's approval, that all 26 federal properties are secured properly with new declarations of trust. We have this thing in HUD Central. HUD Central basically approves everything with the exception of the declarations of trust in the local field office. We're waiting for Mr. Brylinski, who's the general counsel in the Buffalo office, to give his final approval. It is our understanding as of a week ago that HUD Central has no problems with the application. Ms. Feder and I have done over 20 of these throughout the country, including 2 in Lackawanna, 2 in Syracuse, and 1 in Elmira. And it's basically the same kind of transaction. There's no pledge, there's no mortgage, there's no encumbrance, no obligation of the city of Buffalo. The payment of the bonds is subject only to annual appropriation by Congress, which they've never failed to do. It's rated AA-. Historically, these transactions were rated AA, but then the United States was downgraded from AAA. I guess that's our basic summation of the process.
Okay, very good. Any questions for Mr. Solomon or for Gillian?
So this is
go ahead, Jeanette.
This is Jeanette Terasek. So the repayment procedure, does the HUD make a transfer of $15 million into the annual capital budget in Buffalo, from which BMHA then handles the repayment, or is the repayment handled by Central?
HUD has a procedure called the LOX procedure. Under the LOX procedure, every 6 months, HUD makes debt service payments directly to the bond trustee. The BMHA is not involved. So there's no chance of those payments. There's no chance of those payments going anyplace else. They're paid directly to the bond trustee.
Okay, they're paid directly to the bond trustee from Central.
Yes, from Central, yes.
Okay,
it's called the LOCK system, LOCCS.
Okay, so that means that would in next year's results, the operating results, or in the capital budget, we would see a bulge of $15 million new, but we wouldn't see the transactions that retire the debt, correct?
You would see the bulge of $15 million coming in. I think right now the Housing Authority receives approximately $11.6 million every year from the capital program. The debt service in this bond issue will be subtracted from that. So it'll be $11.6 minus $970,000. So the Housing Authority will receive $10.6 million.
Okay, all right. Okay, so on their books, we would, because we do have access to their books, we would see the payment in, and we would not see the payment out.
Correct.
Correct.
You would just see a smaller amount of regular capital funds, and you would see this. I expect it will be indicated on a separate line. We've never done one of these before, so I don't really know. But I would expect that the $15 million, which has its own obligation and expenditure schedule, would be reflected in a different line in next year's capital fund budget. And we will be using that $15 million to draw down for the specific work that we're using the CFFP borrowing for.
Okay, so since it does not amalgamate, we would always be able to track the in and the out easily.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Also, if I may add, the official statement will be posted on EMMA, which is the Electric Repository, the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, and the housing authority is required to post their annual financial statements on EMMA every year.
All right. And allow me one additional question.
Yes, sir.
If I look at the candidates, or rather the funding projects in the facilities, the Gary complex, LBJ complex, are some of those past their federally determined usable lifespan? And that's a question.
No, that's a good question, and I appreciate it. These are all 5 of these developments are standalone elderly and disabled developments, and they were selected for this work precisely because they're not obsolete and they're not past their useful life, but they are desperately in need of some capital improvements. The bottom line reasoning is there's sort of several factors that went into it. First and foremost were the results of the physical needs assessment, which showed what we needed. Second was the ability to do simple, quote unquote, discrete projects on these buildings that would have tangible, nearly immediate results. New elevators, new kitchens, new bathrooms. These are the kind of things that we have found dramatically increase tenant retention, and we feel that this is a way for us to attack and address the vacancy rate and also address the tenant retention issues. So we're striving to make these 5 buildings separate and apart from the capital improvements that we're embarking on all the other developments. These 5 elderly and disabled developments were just so in need of it. I don't want to call it cosmetic because it's not. It's really fundamental stuff. But these are kitchens and baths that haven't been improved in probably 20, if not 30 years. These are elevators, in some cases, that are the original elevators from the building when it was built. So in doing this, we'll be able to increase security, we'll be increasing tenant retention, we'll be increasing the desirability of these buildings so that people want to seek out apartments for their elderly family members in our buildings instead of making them sort of a housing of last resort. That's the thinking that went into it, and that's why we picked the 5 standalone elderly and disabled buildings. But none of them are slated for demolition. None of them are what HUD would consider obsolete or past their useful life.
All right, good. And the determination of these 5 structures as being the beneficiaries of, as you say, all super quality of life factors, bathrooms and kitchens. What was the name of the outside firm that conducted the analysis?
The P&A was performed by Dominion Due Diligence Group. They were the successful responder to an RFP that we issued when we realized we needed one.
So, and it was they working with the authority who determined these facilities and these upgrades.
Correct. They performed the physical needs analysis on every single one of our 27 or 28 developments citywide, and then they brought back the results, and we analyzed the results to determine which ones we could sort of attack with a limited amount of money of, about $10 or $11 million for construction.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hi, this is Director Floss. So if we can get back, did we bid out all the different parts to this, whether it be the legal, the bond count, the bond placement? Was that all done on an RFP, or was only the P&A done?
This is
Only
Robert.
I'll let Robert talk in a sec. Only the P&A was procured after an RFP process. The bond placement is exempt from those requirements, and I'll let Mr. Solomon explain that.
Okay.
Based on HUD regulations, which we've provided to the authority, this is considered to be a financing transaction, and basically the underwriter is responsible for putting together a financing team. And we've tried basically to hire all professionals who have experience in doing these kind of transactions we've worked with in the past. Bond counsel is Harris Beach from Rochester, which is pretty close by.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, all right. How did we decide then from this group to go for approximately $10 million? Is there another building or project that would be close? Or are we looking to do, after we do these 5, are we looking to do an additional bonding after this?
We may do another one of these transactions in the future. It was my decision to keep this as a limited borrowing because this is the first time we're using this program. And I wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to have the capacity to administer a construction project of this size and obligate and expend the funds. I didn't want to bite off more than we could chew. And I didn't want to encumber, because remember, this is, for lack of a better analogy, this is sort of like a home equity loan. And I didn't really want to encumber a lot more of our future capital fund allocations until I knew how well this worked. So I decided that we should make this a limited borrowing that would have immediate results on these 5 buildings. And then if this works out as well as I hope it does, then we can use this same method for different kinds of projects in the future. The anticipated redevelopment is Schaefer Village, or perhaps allocating money toward a solution for the Perry development. There are all sorts of possibilities in the years to come, but I wanted to make this one something that we could all get our hands around as a first attempt, basically.
So are all of these shovel-ready projects, are we going to turn around and start doing these, let's say, in the next 6 months?
Well, we're not going to be able to start, actual construction, but we're going to be procuring and designing, getting everything ready. Robert, I think that the money has to be obligated and expended within 3 years, correct?
Yes, sir. Yep.
So all 5 of these will be done and complete 3 years from the time of financing.
Okay. And I'm glad to hear that you're looking obviously at other projects. So I think that's sort of important. So do you have a target for how much debt service you would be looking at over time that you might have as a target?
At this point, we don't have what we're doing with this transaction. Will be utilizing roughly 8% of our capital fund allocation annually going forward. That means that we will still have our remaining capital fund allocation for all the other projects we're working on. So this is like a parallel, it's almost a parallel modernization program that we're embarking on. So, no, I don't have a target for how much more I would like to do. I'd like to first see where capital fund allocations are going from HUD, because if the capital fund allocations decrease in the next couple of years, obviously this financing will always get paid right off the top, which means it will then start having less and less, obviously, in the regular capital fund. and I want to see what the trends are and what the predictions are for what HUD is going to allocate before we decide whether to do one of these borrowings again.
Are you putting additional capital funds into these 5 properties? I mean, are you putting roofs or anything else on so that you're protecting
when they're necessary? LBJ and Geary just had roof work done. We're doing separate from this. We're installing new air conditioners at Geary. We are continuing to do regularly scheduled modernization work as it appears in our annual plan and our 5-year plan. That will continue. These are all projects that were sort of wish list projects, if you will, for these 5 developments.
So, but you're not taking additional funds out of other properties to improve these 5 at the expense of others, then I take?
No, that we will not be doing. That's really, you've hit on the root cause of this. The reason why we're doing this is so that we can, with a minimal impact on our regular capital fund allocation, do these bigger projects on these 5 developments without impacting the rest of our modernization schedule.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for BMHA?
This is Donna. I had a question. So, Gillian, the capital improvements budget then will be reduced by this $1.6 million. Does the A&E cost come out of the bond money, or does that come out of your capital program, your capital improvement budget?
All the costs associated with the capital fund financing program will be borne out of the total $15 million borrowing. None of this comes out of the regular modernization budget.
Okay, so you won't be impacted. That's good. Great. Thank you.
Sure.
And this is Jeanette again. And Mr. Brown, I think you said it. Just please recap it so I have it correct. The commonality among all 5 buildings is a dedicated residential type, either disability or senior. Is that what you said?
These are all elderly and disabled buildings, yes.
Okay. All right. So, okay, good.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks very much. As I understand it, we will record any formal comments for the record, and that will be conveyed to the BMHA Board of Commissioners. Is that right, Jeanette?
That's correct. I've been, although as I've been listening, I did not hear any formal comments other than, our questions were satisfactorily answered. If there's any other comments to be conveyed to the Board of Commissioners, I will, record those now.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian.
Thank you.
Sounds like a very prudent and necessary project. We certainly look forward to seeing improvements in these buildings.
I have high hopes.
Yes, absolutely. We'll now move on to the BFSA business and begin with a brief organizational review from Jeanette.
Thank you. I just have a few slides to just provide our annual organizational review, overview of the organization. There are 2 standing committees that this authority maintains, the Audit, Finance, and Budget Committee and the Governance Committee. If and when at some point we were to issue debt on behalf of the city, we would split the Audit Committee from the Finance Committee, and we would have 3 separate standing committees at that point because we're not conducting any financial transactions. We have combined that into one committee and have operated under 2 committees for a number of years. It is the responsibility of the Audit, Finance, and Budget Committee to assist the directors in fulfilling their responsibilities as it relates to reviewing and approving budgets. Although the budget is ultimately approved by the full board, it is based on a recommendation by the ASB committee. This committee also reviews financial operations and controls of the organization, as well as accounting policies and reporting practices and the results of the audit, which is conducted in September annually. It is led by Chair Olson and includes Interim Vice Chair Jurasek and Director Floss. Additional directors participate as requested by the committee chair and as per a standing invitation by the chair. All directors are invited to attend any committee meeting. It generally convenes 3 to 4 times a year, and the meeting agendas, as discussed, include the budget, the audit, and our annual report, which will also, it's also in connection with our annual independent audit. We report in the September time frame annually, and that is required to be filed with the state, and also the internal audit review, which is conducted annually. The governance committee is responsible for keeping the board informed of best governance practices, reviewing governance trends, reviewing and updating our governance principles, such as what was conducted today, and which was conducted today regarding all the various policies and procedures of the organization. I did not include in here the change that was made to the bylaws. It's not a standing committee, of course, that was reflected in the bylaw change that occurred at the last board meeting, but based on if we have difficulty convening a meeting with a quorum, the chair at his or her discretion may convene an ad hoc committee to conduct business, review the transactions, and make recommendations to the board the next time the full board is convening. With respect to the governance committee, it's led by Chair Olson, and it is staffed by Vice Chair Jurasek and Secretary Arthur. Convenes generally 3 times a year, and the meeting agendas include reviewing and renewing existing operational policies, implementing and or recommending new policies and procedures with New York State laws be approved by the full board, and also conducts the annual Board of Directors self-evaluation. I'm now on slide 9 for anybody following along, and actually if you're not following along, I'd suggest firing up the presentation. There's a couple slides with summaries of negotiating units that would be helpful for you to take a look at. An org chart is provided on slide 9. There are 5 BFSA staff. Bryce Link is the principal analyst. He covers the analyst procedures over the City of Buffalo and over the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency. Because we're a small organization, there's several other hats that everybody maintains, one of which is media liaison. I didn't put all those different categorical responsibilities under each person's heading, but I can think of, in addition to several things that Bryce does, he's also the internal control officer. He conducts our annual internal control work and reports to the audit committee on that item. Nathan Miller is senior financial analyst too. Part of those various hats that I mentioned, he's also our manager of technology, which seems to become more and more time-consuming annually as we've become more and more reliant on technology, especially over the last few months. His analyst responsibilities cover the Buffalo City School District and the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority. Claire Waldron is the BFSA's controller. The gamut of all the accounting responsibilities falls under her umbrella. In addition, all the debt service payments fall under her umbrella. She is tracking and reporting on state aid, on sales tax. she's monitoring trends in the economy to predict when and if we will see changes from a revenue stream, in addition to what is being conducted by the analysts, of course. And she provides additional support as needed with reporting, with our various reports. And then, Nikita Fortune is our administrative assistant. That position entails a lot of different responsibilities. She is responsible for drafting the board minutes, for establishing and compiling our board books, assisting with state filings, assisting with filings with the city and the covered organizations, our mailings, our distribution of articles, to keep our board and staff informed, in addition to many other responsibilities. I'm just hitting some of the highlights on those. So that's an overview of our organization that we conduct annually. I will pause at this point to see if there's any questions. Okay, thank you. Hearing none, I'll just move on down to slide number 10. We provided a summary here of the negotiating units of the various covered organizations and a snapshot of where each organization stands with respect to outstanding contracts with their negotiating units. Items in red are cited as red, meaning that their contracts have expired. For the City of Buffalo, those contracts that have expired include the police, which currently has 748 included in that unit at June 30th. That contract expired on June 30th, 2019. Local 264, which is the blue-collar representation, includes 368 general fund employees, 41 water enterprise employees, 136 refuse employees. That also expired on June 30th, 2019. The large union for fire is current through June 30th of 2024. There were 738 members as of June 30th. And the white collar also is through June 30th of 2024. And as you can see, the majority of white-collar employees are in the general fund, with a couple represented in refuse and parking and 31 in water. The slash on that stands for the exempt employees. General fund has 137 exempt employees that generally follow the terms of the white-collar contract, although there are certain differences that we've discussed in past meetings, but largely does follow those contract terms. Crossing guards expired August 31st, 2019. Building inspectors just expired on June 30th, 2020. The water caulkers union with the Water Enterprise Fund, Local 264, is negotiated through June 30th, 2022. And the operating engineers also expired on June 30th, 2020. In slide number 12, we have a similar snapshot for the Buffalo City School District. Importantly, the BTF, or the Teachers Union, expired on June 30th, 2019. The second largest cost union is the administrators, and that will expire on September 1st of 2020. Excuse me. Moving on down the line, the teacher aides and assistants, that is long outstanding. It expired June 30th of 2012. Substitutes reviewed recently over this last fiscal year. It expires June 30th of 21, along with bus aides. White collar is negotiated through June 30th of 2022. Local 264 varies. The blue collar expired June 30th, 2013. Long outstanding. Food service workers, cook managers, expires on June 30th of 2022, and summer food service, summer of 2019. The custodial engineers, we've discussed it in the past, that's an outlier group as they are out, have a different type of negotiating tool, so to speak, with their custodial engineers. That expired June 30th of 2010. Moving to the Housing Authority. Housing Authority has all unions settled through June 30th of 2023. There are 3 exempt employees that have individual contracts, and there are 10 non-represented civil service employees that are at-will employees, but they do maintain New York State civil service protections. And then finally, the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency. They have 22 employees currently within their negotiating unit. They have 1, and their CBA just recently expired on June 30th of 2020. I refer to these counts often and these sheets often during the year, and I thought it would be useful to provide that summary to you today. And that summarizes my comments for the board. I will certainly take any questions or comments.
Just a continuing observation that the situation with the school district is certainly troubling with respect to their union contracts. And under the circumstances, it seems unlikely to get better anytime soon, which is, I think, a big problem given the amount of change and flexibility that's being required in order to deal with the pandemic.
Yeah, and this is Director Floss. I would just say that I think we have to be very careful about monitoring their reserves and that we don't spend them down to a point where then they can't address their workforce at all, that they're going to put themselves into a position that they might not be able to get out of. So that I think even though they do have some reserves, that looking at the number of contracts that are out of term cause some concern, I would think, and would basically say that we're overstating their reserves at this point.
Okay, any other comments? I would certainly agree with Fred that we need to be on top of this, particularly with respect to the district. They've done a good job, with significant assistance from the state in maintaining reserves under difficult circumstances, but they're going fast. They have obviously a significant backlog of expired contractual agreements, and now more than ever it requires very close working collaboration between all of the various units. So that's obviously not a very good situation. So I think it certainly bears close monitoring on our part. Any other comments? Okay. We're now going to seek approval by the full board of the various BFSA policies in the annual procurement report and prompt payment report. Governance Committee met earlier today and is recommending to the full board that approval of various guidelines, policies, and reports. We're being asked to ratify the committee's decision, and I would like to take them all in one action, if we could. The policies and guidelines have been provided you under Tab 1, with the various draft resolutions provided separately under Tab 5. These policies and reports include the Code of Ethics, the mission statement, investment guidelines, property disposal guidelines, use of discretionary funds policy, whistleblower policy, the lobbying policy, procurement guidelines, the prompt payment policy, the annual procurement report, and the annual prompt payment report. Do I have a motion to approve these resolutions addressing the items in one vote?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Seconded by Jeanette.
Thank you, Jeanette. Is there any further discussion on this matter? Okay, hearing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor of the motion, vote aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Very well, passes. This concludes the business portion of our meeting, refreshingly short in comparison to our prior special meetings. Are there any new business matters to discuss? Hearing none, we would ordinarily go to a public comment period, but given the difficulty of conducting such comments in a virtual meeting, we will forego it today. Comments may be submitted to the BFSA as directed on the BFSA website or by calling staff at 716-853-0907. Okay, this concludes this meeting of the Buffalo Fiscal Stability Authority. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Okay, I'll take that by acclamation. We stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody. We've had a lot of meetings, and we're obviously on a rather lean quorum. So I appreciate everyone's efforts to make this meeting. And as such, we stand adjourned. Thank you.